Welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. This is now our third top of the hour. We've opened the virtual house at about 4 o'clock, and we'll be here until 8. And this is just the beginning of a series of ways to hear from everyone what safe streets mean to you. So if you're just joining us, you're coming in at a time when we're going to do an introduction, an overview, and ways that you can contribute feedback. If you're still with us, please go to our website, visionzerohouston.com, take the survey, look at the map, and tell us where your traffic safety concerns are, and we'll talk all about that over the next hour. The slides were posted in the meeting chat an hour ago. We can post them in there again if one of my teammates doesn't mind doing that. At any time over as we continue to engage with you, you can always reach out to us. We have a mobility planning email address, which is mobility.planning@houstontx.gov. And you can always give us a call at 832-393-6660. So, this is a time to engage with you. Type in the chat box, speak up, but always you can reach out to us at that email and phone number. Just a few meeting instructions. I think everybody are experts at these sorts of things these days. If you're calling in, you can press *6 to mute and unmute. If you're on Teams, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a bar with some options and a microphone with that slash through it means you're muted, which is what we're asking of you for a little bit of the time, and then we'll designate some time for open discussion, and you can unmute. If you don't want to speak up, you can always use the chat feature here, which is indicated by this chat box. And if you want to speak up when it's time for open discussion at any time, you can use the raise your hand feature, and we'll have staff calling you out when it's time, and you can speak up then. So how we're structuring the open house is that you can join at any time, but generally if you want to follow us at the top of the hour, we're going to do an introduction and a safe streets discussion and how you can help the city and partners. Provide feedback. Tell us where you feel unsafe, and tell us where you want us to prioritize our efforts. We need to hear from you. And at the bottom of each hour at 4:30, 5:30, 6:30, and 7:30, we're going to be speaking with a local expert and advocate and open it up for discussion. So if people have been posting in the chat, we'll report out about what people are saying. If you have a question, unmute yourself, ask away. And we'll also go over some of the responses that we're getting on the map and the survey that we have available. So before we go into what is Vision Zero, there is an absolute need to acknowledge the relationship between transportation, justice, and social and environmental justice and what's happening right now as it relates to our systems and how historically we have not invested equitably in our communities. Safe streets are critical to every community, but we need to, as part of our Vision Zero strategy, recognize how communities have not seen the investments that other communities have, and how specifically there's been an imbalance that has negatively impacted low-income people and communities of color. And our Vision Zero effort is really going to focus on the equity piece and making sure we're investing in those underrepresented and underserved communities. So really quickly, we've got an awesome team of people who are sort of behind the scenes, managing the chat, what would usually be in-person facilitators and asking questions and recording on a notepad. We're just doing that virtually, and these are the awesome team of people helping out. So David was on in the previous hour. He's our chief transportation planner. I'm Lauren Grove. I'm a transportation planner here in the planning department. We've got Sharon, our division manager, Melissa, Brian, and Pete. Really awesome to work with everybody. We're doing a lot, and I appreciate everyone's help. If you see their names in the chat, that's who they are, and so they're just gonna provide any comments or answers to your questions that you may have and report out when it's time. And I want to maybe pause here. I'm not sure if our director, Margaret, is still on the line. Margaret, feel free to jump in and introduce if you are. Nope, okay. I'm seeing a shaking head from David. We have Jennifer, Katrina, and Teresa who are also helping us out and really helping to make sure that all the feedback that we get from today goes into our action plan. Thank you, everyone. So what is
Margaret did provide a little comment and intro to everybody in the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you, Margaret. So what is Vision Zero? Vision Zero is a strategy that has been adopted by cities around the globe with the unified goal of ending traffic deaths and serious injuries. So when a city adopts Vision Zero, they are committing to ending traffic deaths and serious injuries. And part of that commitment is a shift in how we think about traffic safety. And that is that no loss of life by traffic crash is acceptable, and that traffic deaths are preventable. There are things that we can be doing to prevent people from dying on our roadways. And we'll talk more about what those strategies are. Why I care so much about Vision Zero is that it recognizes we're all humans and we all make mistakes. We're not perfect, we all know that, and here is a strategy that recognizes that and says we can design transportation as a system, so not one mode operating outside of the other, but as a system that's connected, that can be forgiving of those mistakes, that those mistakes don't mean traffic death or serious injury. And it also prioritizes the quality of human life. So oftentimes we forget that our streets and getting to where we want to go just is ingrained in us. And so if we really think that those streets though can be safe and improve our quality of life, that's what Vision Zero tries to convey, is that cultural shift. And finally, Vision Zero really focuses on equity. And we know that not everybody has the means to get around maybe in the ways that they want. Not everybody can afford a car. We know that people just want to choose an active lifestyle. However they get around, Vision Zero prioritizes investments where we're seeing a disproportionate amount of traffic deaths and serious injuries. And so point everybody to a really great resource, the Vision Zero Network, visionzeronetwork.org. To learn more about what other cities are doing. That's how Houston started, is just by looking to other cities, what are they doing and what can we learn from them. And Vision Zero Network is a really great resource for looking globally at what's going on related to street safety. But really though, what does it mean for Houston? Houston is not other cities that have adopted it. So what does it mean for us here? Vision Zero for Houston is a commitment to end traffic deaths and serious injuries by 2030. And that's also a commitment to saying that we are going to prevent traffic deaths and that no loss of life is acceptable. It is a paradigm shift too, so I think it's important to recognize that while we're ending traffic deaths and serious injury, that's an improvement for everyone's mobility. So whether you're walking, biking, taking transit, driving, you're in a wheelchair, this is about making sure that everybody has safe access to any transportation option. And it really prioritizes safety and accessibility for people of all ages and abilities. So, we've progressed and we've built on plans that have advanced the city's shift to more mobility options. But what we're really saying here is, like, we need to make this safe for anyone of any age, whether you're young and learning how to ride a bike, and you should have a safe space on the street, and any ability. So thinking about people who may not move around in the way that we do, and making sure that our streets are safe and accessible for everyone. And finally, if we think about traffic deaths and serious injuries, they don't happen just on their own. It's part of a system, and it's all connected. So if we start to think about this as a public health issue that's unacceptable and preventable, we can start to think about really making that paradigm shift that we're talking about, and that shift to recognizing this as really deeply impacting our quality of life and our health. So that's just a few of the key components that, what Vision Zero means for Houston. There's much more that goes into that, but what we want to do is hear from you. What does it mean, and what really do safe streets mean to you? So we're going to take a little pause here, and I'll ask everyone who's on the call joining us to go to slido.com, SLIDO.com, and type in the code VZHTX, so like Vision Zero Houston, Texas, VZHTX. And if staff don't mind posting that in the chat, we have two questions for you. What are streets for? What do you think that streets are for? And when do streets and intersections feel unsafe? What does that mean for you when a street or intersection feels unsafe? So it's these two questions. They're open text, so you can type whatever you'd like. Again, it's slido.com, and the code is VZHTX. So I'm going to leave that up for just a minute, because while we're getting some responses, I'm going to show a video where we asked, prior to this meeting, we asked a few Houstonians some similar questions, and I'm going to play that for you right now. Making sure that I did not do the audio, probably. Hold on a minute. Just a second here, folks. Okay. Here we go. So really what we were trying to do is talk to people outside of the transportation world about traffic crashes in Houston. We're going to be talking about our questions related to traffic crashes. I'm going to ask 5 questions that are related to traffic crashes.
Are we talking highways, or are we talking regular, just around town streets?
Houston proper, couple hundred.
I would assume it's hundreds, if not more.
I do not know, but I'm sure it's over 100.
I'd say about 70,000 people.
Per year, I would guess. I would guess 200.
I'd say maybe like 15,000 or something.
I'm just going to guess and say 350.
People driving too fast and not paying attention.
Probably speeding, driver impairment, and driver inattention.
I think that's like the main one. Like literally people just not paying attention.
I see a lot of confusion on the roadway, missing exits, people stopping in the middle of the highway because they've missed an exit.
Texting, being impaired from alcohol or drugs.
Drinking while driving is probably the number one leading cause of crashes.
Lack of infrastructure that prioritizes pedestrians and cyclists. Probably some road design.
No, I don't think so.
I'd like to think so.
No.
I'd love to say yeah, but probably not.
I hope so.
I don't think so, but I'd like to hope so.
I think there used to be a time where, single death was front page news, and now it's become so normalized.
I think as car dependent as Houston is, there probably will always be some fatalities, but I think they can be greatly reduced.
Do I think we can get down to, 10 or 20 realistically? Yeah, someday.
Decrease the amount of, I guess, like crashes on the highway, and then figure out like a different goal for the actual regular roads.
Under 25.
I think acceptable is 0.
0, of course.
To have 0?
None.
For my family, it'd be 0. I think the goal should be 0, yes.
I would have a stated goal of 0.
I think the goal should be 0 for everyone. I don't think anyone should suffer.
I think the goal should be 0 for everyone.
Okay. So, thank you to the folks who participated in that video. We want to talk to more people about, their perceptions of safe streets and concerns about traffic safety in Houston. And I'll take a pause here. Can certainly put up the responses from our activity here where we're looking at what are streets for and when do streets and intersections feel unsafe. And I'll take a pause and see if there are any comments or questions in the chat. And I'll call on, I think it's Pete or Jennifer, if there are any responses in the chat, feel free to shout it out.
Hey, Lauren. So this is Peter, and we have a comment in the chat. It was from just towards the end of the 5 o'clock hour from Luis G, who had a question about Metro. 1 second, let me scroll back to it. Yeah, so Metro has funds for bike ped improvements in areas within half a mile from transit priority areas, and that agency has its own prioritization process, but he's curious how additional funding outside of the city of Houston could be leveraged to align with the Vision Zero process. And we also have Yahaina Mahmood from Metro, who might be able to answer that question directly. So Yahaina, you're up if you'd like to answer that on the chat.
Yes. You want me to respond like this?
Yeah.
Don't mind.
Okay.
Sorry to put you on the spot. We appreciate it.
It's fine. Yeah, so Metro has, with Metro Next, we're assessing first last mile projects, which means bikeway and sidewalk projects with each of the projects that we move forward. We've been working closely, we work with you guys, we work closely with the Public Works, and we are looking at safe crossing treatments at intersections or where we have service and bus stops, and perhaps there is long sections where there's not a safe intersection, signalized intersections for people to cross. Working closely with Public Works to allow us to do some safe crossings in those sections. So for Metro, safety is a very high priority, and we are looking at integrating anything that is brought up Vision Zero related into our projects. But we're already advancing, some projects that we have been working to make sure that we integrate design that is includes safety as a priority for our customers and for anyone really using the streets, because once we make an improvement at an intersection, everybody benefits. But we're definitely closely working with the city on this.
Awesome. That's great to hear Metro recognize the importance of all different modes working together.
Yeah, we're
exciting
also
time.
working, I think you mentioned TERSs, and we have approached TERSs. We're working closely with Harris County Precinct 1 has a partner in a couple of our projects and a couple of TERSs as well. So we're definitely leveraging funding from everybody to be able to make this work. And as Vision Zero advances, I know that one of our board members and our CEO are very interested and have been participating in this process. So it is definitely a priority for us. Thank you.
Fantastic. And then, Lauren, I noticed one other question from Jessica Wiggins. In the past, enforcement has been a core pillar to Vision Zero. How are you and your team thinking about how enforcement can negatively affect communities of color? And can Black Lives Matter or other advocates be involved in these conversations as we shift our perspective?
That's a really great question. I was thinking a lot about that before the open house. Those relationships with police are so important. They've been at the table for our Vision Zero effort, and I think we have to continue the conversation about what that really looks like moving forward as part of Vision Zero, and how are police going to respond, and how we are going to build relationships with our communities that expands beyond enforcement. We have to think about working with communities and recognizing their context, because each community is different. And I think our police department is willing to be a part of that conversation. And I think of course we want more people at the table. I think a lot of it has been our amazing agencies and partners who work on transportation, but we need more communities, advocates and leaders at the table too. And that's the start of this right now. And we invite anyone to be a part of this, and recognizing that specifically, and that relationship with this enforcement, I think is really special and important. So thanks for bringing that forward, Jessica.
And then, Lauren, I've got one more question for you if we have time.
Totally, yep. Got about 7 minutes.
Oh, okay, great. So here was a question about bike lanes, the new bike lanes that we have out there, and often cars or trucks parking in them. An attendee said that this is something that they're seeing more and more of, and it forces riders out into the street. Sometimes it dislodges whatever physical separation is there, like the rubber armadillo humps that we use. That also goes not just for bike lanes, but for parking across sidewalks, which again forces people, often children, into the street. So what can we do to educate folks on obstructing these key right-of-ways for our vulnerable road users?
That's a really great question. I have an immediate thought, and then Pete, if you want to jump in on this too, and the rest of the transportation team, but I think about how we're developing our cities. And so when we think about driveways that we're putting in front of homes and blocking sidewalks, that's a key call for working better with our developers and builders to talk about that the safety and accessibility component is part of our design strategy now that we're a Vision Zero city. And so that's my first reaction to that, is really thinking about how we can better build those relationships with developers a little bit better to provide that understanding. And then if any other folks want to jump in on that question, I encourage our team to do so.
I can speak briefly to it. So you and I and the rest of our team have been involved with introducing these new types of streets and other facilities to our communities. They're often brand new things for the city of Houston. We've been involved in some outreach efforts like new signs and flyers and other means of conveying how to use these new facilities, because often it's simple as just teaching people how. So that's been one strategy we've deployed. It's been effective in some ways, but our work is never done, and we look forward to hearing how we can make this better and better. And I see some of my teammates turning on their cameras, so that might be a good sign.
Oh, I just wanted to speak to the no parking in bike lane ordinance. So we are working with the Bicycle Advisory Committee. We've been working with the Bicycle Advisory Committee for the last couple of years, and one of their recommendations was to pursue a no parking in the bike lane ordinance to prevent people from parking in our new high comfort bike lanes. And then that will also help us have a targeted outreach strategy with that new policy in place. So we're actively working with the rest of the city of Houston to bring forth that ordinance, hopefully sometime soon.
And I just wanted to jump in, and it's kind of along the same lines with what Melissa's stating as far as the ordinance is concerned. When we have signage out there so that people know that it is illegal to park in the bike lane. So as we work toward getting this information out to the public, we're also working on getting signage, which will make it illegal to park there in those particular lanes. It's a process. We're beginning. We're getting there. We will be a lot closer sooner, maybe than later, but we're working on it to make sure that the public has the information that they need and that we're working along the guidelines of the ordinance with the proper signage as the law requires.
Thanks, team, for contributing to that. We've got about 3 more minutes before we speak with Tom Flanagan, who's with Memorial Hermann. So keep commenting, raising your hand if you want to speak up, or if you're dialing in, press *6 to unmute. And in the meantime, we can see what's happening on our poll, where we asked, what are streets for, and when do streets and intersections feel unsafe? So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here. Let's see, we've got about 66 responses so far. And if you're joining us, feel free to go to slido.com with the code VZHTX and help us to answer 2 questions here. Our first question is, what are streets for? And some folks are responding increasing mobility and transporting people from one place to another, accessing destinations and public space, getting from one place to another, pedestrians and cyclists. Streets are for connecting. Streets are for everyone, for moving people and goods. Streets are for transportation for drivers and bikers and pedestrians. Pedestrians should be on sidewalks. Streets are not for racing. Streets are also for exercise. Streets are for automobiles and bikes. Streets are for everyone to move around safely regardless of their mode. Streets are for protest. Streets are for more than cars. Streets are for living, the entire community, commerce, traveling from point A to B in some type of legal transportation without interrupting residential or commercial property. Moving floodwater, people, mobility, devices. So we're seeing a lot of people express that streets are for a lot of different things, which is exactly what the strategy is for Vision Zero, is the concept that streets are shared and we can make them safe for everyone in every one of these ways to get around. So when do people feel unsafe on streets? 66 responsive. We've got cars are too close and moving too fast. When you can't see the entire intersection clearly, when there are no sidewalks or bicycle lanes. Streets and intersections feel unsafe when when vehicle traffic is prioritized over walking and biking, when there isn't a safe way to cross the street as a walker. Lots of really informative responses here. When they feel unsafe when drivers don't pay attention to other people, when they're wide, fast cars, no infrastructure, no tree shade. They feel unsafe when there are deep, steep ditches on both sides of the road. There isn't proper signage and there are no shoulders or sidewalks. So this is really, really helpful. And these questions are part of our survey that's on our website currently. We ask, there's a full survey on our website. We'd love for you all to fill it out. We'll point that out a little bit later. But a lot of this we want to capture and continue capturing. That will be part of our action plan. Hello, did I hear somebody? Oh, okay. So with that, we're right at about 6:30, and that means we're at the bottom of this hour, and we want to speak with one of the many experts here and provide a perspective from public health. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the time for interview, sorry. Okay, so it is 6:30 and we are going to be speaking with Tom Flanagan. Tom, are you out in the virtual world? Are you with us?
I'm sorry, I was muted. This is Tom Flanagan. Were you asking for me?
I'm asking for you, Tom, yes.
Okay, I'm here.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and glad to have you. We're going to ask some questions, and then we've got some people commenting who may have questions for you. But first, let's just start with telling us about yourself and how your work relates to traffic crashes.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me this evening. And I actually represent Memorial Hermann Healthcare System. I am a registered nurse by training and worked at the bedside as an emergency department nurse in a community hospital, and then in the Level 1 Trauma Center at Memorial Hermann in the Texas Medical Center. And during my tenure at Memorial Hermann TMC, I was a flight nurse on board the Life Flight helicopters for approximately, I flew for about 21 years, 22 years. Currently, I am the vice president of our system-wide trauma service line, and I am the vice president of Life Flight operations and disaster management, forensic nursing, and transfer center at Memorial Hermann. So I've been an RN and a licensed paramedic in the state of Texas. And I have a bachelor's in nursing and a master's in organizational management. So that's my background. I still have the day-to-day responsibility for operations for Life Flight, which is based at Memorial Hermann. And we cover a 150-mile radius from the Texas Medical Center, which takes our helicopters to as far east as Lake Charles, Louisiana, and as far west as Austin, and as far south as Corpus Christi. So about a 150-mile radius from the Texas Medical Center. Today we operate 4 helicopters 24/7, 365 days a year. And then we have a 5th aircraft, which is operated 12 hours a day out of the Texas Medical Center. And then we have a 6th aircraft that is based at our maintenance facility, and we put that into service when one of our other aircraft go in for maintenance, scheduled or unscheduled. And the 4 helicopters are based in the community. One is based in Spring, Texas, at Spring and Tomball at David Wayne Hooks Airport. That's our north ship. Our east ship is based at the Baytown Airport. Our south ship is based at Cloverfield between Friendswood and Pearland. And our 3rd ship and our 4th ship is based out in Katy at Memorial Hermann Katy campus. And so we do about 3,500 to 3,800, it varies, flights per year by helicopter. About 60% of those flights are what we call a scene response, where the helicopter is called directly to the scene of the crash or injury. and we airlift the patient from there to the level 1 trauma center. And they'll either, if they're closer to Galveston, we go into UTMB, which is a level 1 trauma center, or they come to Memorial Hermann, the Texas Medical Center's level 1 trauma center. We do not go to Ben Taub directly, as Ben Taub has no helipad or heliport. So that's kind of the operations from that perspective.
Great, thank you for providing that information. That's really helpful to think about this component of traffic crashes and response to them. So what's the first thing that you think of when I say safe streets?
Without crashes that are caused by distracted driving or intoxicated drivers today. That's the first thing that comes to mind, that we've been able to get a handle on the intoxication piece and on the distraction piece.
Okay, would you mind expanding on that just a little bit?
Sure. A couple of years ago, we engaged with a group called Safe to Save. And it's a not-for-profit group that started actually from a young adult that was hit up around College Station up near Texas A&M, was hit by a distracted driver and was killed. And this group up there started this organization called Safe to Save. And what we did was there's an app that we purchased that goes on your cell phone. It's free to download, and it's called Safe to Save. And what we've done is we've provided it for the Houston metropolitan area. And what it does is, if you're driving and someone calls you and you have the app automatically pops up, and you get to download a picture on your app of whatever is most important to you from a family perspective, whether it be your spouse or your children or grandchildren or friends or whatever. And the app pops up with that picture and says they can wait, the call can wait. And what we do is we partnered with businesses in the local areas that they join in, and what they do is you gain points based upon miles driven without being interrupted by text messaging or phone calls. You achieve points, and you trade those points in at the different places of business, whether it be Carrabba's, whether it be one of the juice bars, Chick-fil-A, all different types of restaurants and stuff. So you can use your app and go in and buy a sandwich or whatever and not have to pay for it if you have enough points. And so we engaged in that because we were starting to see, over the years of my flying on the helicopters, when I first started flying in the 80s, I was actually quite shocked at the amount of driving while under the substance, in the influence. And it was quite bothersome. And as laws changed in the state, and we started putting up task forces on major holidays such as New Year's and 4th of July, Memorial Day, and doing these checks where the Department of Public Safety would do these checks, breathalyzer checks, to try to stop some of the driving while under the influence. And then with the addition of Uber and Lyft, and communities have contracted with some of these rideshare programs where after a certain hour at night, you can call them if you're intoxicated or under the influence, and they'll take you home and you don't even have to pay in some of the communities. But the concern was, as we continue with the social media piece and the arrival of cell phones and everyone being on their phone and texting and driving, we started seeing an impact of less while driving under the influence and more from distracted driving. where they were looking down at their phone or trying to read a text and looked up and ran into someone or ran over someone or ran off the road. And so we've really been working with our partners from the Safe to Save app. We now have over, I think the latest was over 100,000 people that have downloaded in the Houston metropolitan area. So, and we continue to try to get the word out. So that's really, when I think of, Zero, it's to stop some of this unnecessary tragedies that happen due to people not being focused and paying attention while driving. And especially trying to get this out. We've met and gotten it out to a lot of the high schools where we have our young drivers starting to drive and can easily be distracted and don't understand some of those consequences. So that's really where we come in, because the amount of injuries, and some of these injuries are life-changing for people, and some are where we've had fatalities, obviously. And under the intoxication piece, what was surprising over the years was typically what we came across was the intoxicated individual typically wasn't, they may have been injured, but it was more minor injuries. The people that they hit who were not intoxicated typically had the most severe injuries and obviously many times resulted in death. And so we're seeing the same thing with the distracted driving. So that's really where we came into all of this was, as a trauma center, and we are the busiest in the nation. Memorial Hermann's Level 1 Trauma Center is the busiest trauma center in the country. We really have a passion to work with our communities to help decrease some of this and get people educated and understanding what the consequences are. Does that make sense?
So what caught me is a few things about what you're saying. We're seeing that in the data that we've looked at too, is what some of the leading causes are impairment and distracted driving. And you mentioned Zero to get there. Are there, in addition to that and to ending traffic deaths, are there other benefits in addition to safety?
Repeat that question. Are there other what?
Sure. So, Vision Zero would end traffic deaths and serious injuries. In addition to that, what are the other benefits? And if you want to think about it too from your health perspective.
It would certainly decrease healthcare costs, obviously, as these people, as patients come in with these injuries. It's not trauma. When you look at trauma, it starts in the pre-hospital setting. And trauma is defined as all the way through rehabilitation to getting the person back to society in a functional manner. And so the costs associated with that are continuing to become astronomical and can be extremely financial devastating for families. And that's just from the financial piece. The other piece to this is, the impact of trauma, and I'm going to put this out there, and certainly not meant for any digression, but, someone has heart disease and someone has cancer. Typically, you're diagnosed and you have a treatment plan, and you work through that treatment plan, and sometimes the treatments are successful and sometimes they're not. And so where I'm going with this is families understand that, the treatment hasn't been working, they don't have a treatment, you just progressively get worse until you transition out of this world. With trauma, it would be, you leave the house this morning to go to work, and the next thing you know, you're getting a phone call from the local trauma center asking if you have a family member by this name, and you say yes, and you tell them who you are, that you need to come to the trauma center because there's been an accident and they've been involved and have been airlifted to us. And so your whole world And the whole family dynamic is totally changed at that point. Totally unexpected, totally unprepared for it. And that begins the whole trauma experience. And a good portion of trauma patients, after they've gotten through the acute side of their health care for trauma, they end up having to go to rehabilitation for continuing rehab to be able to get them back into a functional state in society. Some of these patients, I've had patients that, they're healthy, walking, talking, life is great, and within a moment's notice, they're left a paraplegic or quadriplegic. And if they're 18 years old, they're 23 years old, they're 32 years old, married with children, it's like the whole family unit is totally disrupted and is going to be this way for the remainder of that individual's life. And so many times you see where families start falling apart from a family perspective, and all these other cascading events that take place that disrupt the family because of the trauma. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think you're bringing up a lot of really important components that traffic crashes, especially when they're severe or when there's loss of life, impact so many people, friends and family, and the cost on our system. And that is, really part of that Vision Zero strategy, and thinking about this as a public health issue. What you're saying really resonates with the Vision Zero strategy. So I really appreciate your perspective. I do want to.
Well, it's not just the healthcare costs. That's one component. You've now disrupted, if it's the breadwinner for the family, now you've disrupted their earning income and earning potential and the future of their earning potential, right? Especially if they've had a severe head injury, okay? They may never be able to go back to being who they were professionally to continue to support their families financially, right? And so it hits that whole gamut of not just the healthcare side and the public side, but also from their own personal belief. And then we end up with it rolls over to the public side, because then you're trying to garner state or federal aid to support these folks, whether it be through Social Security, disability, Medicaid at the state level, etc. So it does really do a 360-degree impact.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So I want to, I could keep asking you questions, but I really want to open it up and see what people are commenting, if there are questions for you from other folks, if people want to unmute themselves if you're dialing in and ask Tom any questions or any questions in general about Vision Zero. Now is the time to do so. So I guess first I'll call on Pete or Jennifer if you want to just report out what people may be commenting in the chat, or if there are questions for Tom.
So this is Peter. We actually don't have anything in the chat directly for Tom, but if there are others who are viewing or listening in, I suppose feel free to speak up.
Thanks, Pete.
And I think Tom gave us so much good material just from his Q&A. I started seeing people start to type and then delete it, so I think he is answering things as we went. We really appreciate him joining us.
Yes. Tom, I think we'll, if you want to stick around for a little bit, if any questions pop up, feel free. We want to point people to a few other ways that they can provide us with feedback. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Or Brian, do you want to?
Can you guys hear me? Or?
Do you want to take the lead on that and tell us where we're at with pledges and the map?
Sure. Hello? But before I start, it looks like somebody just unmuted themselves to give some feedback.
Oh, okay.
Hey, I'm sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to ask Tom a quick question. My name is Zoe Hafiz. I'm a physician as well, and work at Memorial Hermann as well. And I just wanted to ask Tom, I know that we all see inside the hospital how much these very preventable crashes destroy lives, probably generationally. Like I'm a pediatrician, we see the health effects of children, both who are impacted by the crash physically and also psychologically, and we see how long that lasts, and it potentially lasts generations. I mean, the effects probably outlive us. Do you have any recommendations on getting other nurses, physicians, healthcare workers who see this on a day-to-day level and sort of advocate for them to start thinking outside of just the four walls of the hospital and onto, the streets in their community, the crosswalks in their community, and sort of get the ball rolling in terms of a more holistic sort of public health standpoint?
Sure. I think that's a great question, number one. Couple of things I just want to share is two issues. One is, yes, they can certainly reach out through the Level 1 Trauma Center, and if they're not working at Memorial Hermann, they certainly can look at their own healthcare facility if it's a designated trauma center. But I would recommend that they get with the outreach prevention folks like at our Level 1 and our Level 2 trauma centers, and they support the entire system from an injury prevention aspect. And the lead on that is Sarah Beth Abbott, and she really does a phenomenal job of, we do programs all over the community of for different age groups, for different schools, church groups, in bringing things to them. We have a driver simulation where you can put the person behind the driver's wheel, and we augment different levels of impairment of what it would look like when they're driving and they're trying to drive the car. We partner with Houston Fire Department on that and do that. We do the Live Your Dreams project, and that's pretty impactful. So there's ways. They just need to reach out, hopefully, to our outreach prevention folks through, like at Memorial Hermann, through us, and get connected. The second piece to that I just want to share with you is, as a trauma nurse myself, when I worked in the emergency department and when I flew on the helicopter, it gets very frustrating. To your point, I can give you countless stories of when I arrived back at the trauma at Hermann with the helicopter and took the patient to the emergency department, then had to meet with their family to explain what was going on. Spent many a times in tears and having to pull yourself together, right, emotionally as the caregiver. And we see it with our physicians and we see it with our nursing staff. And so part of the problem sometimes is they are so emotionally drained at the end of their shift that they don't really have a whole lot of energy to give at that point, or to go, you know what I'm saying? It's trying to, how do we get to them to explain sometimes the best way to work through some of that grief that you're dealing with is trying to go back and teach and get out there and give back from a preventive method. But many of our staff, it was like, look, I don't even have the energy of the time. By the time I finish my rotation, I'm like exhausted emotionally and mentally. So that's an area we've got to continue to try to work on, and how do we get those folks back engaged versus just being the caretaker when they hit the door. Does that make sense? I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, sorry, I muted myself. Yes, it makes sense.
And I'm sure if you're a physician, you've probably seen it in your career as well. I don't know, I didn't hear what type of physician you are, but with our trauma surgeons and our emergency department physicians and our rehab physicians, we do have psychological services for the trauma patients now tied into our service line. And we have a trauma network, a survivors network that we provide for the survivors, both the families as well as the patients themselves, for group activity and group therapy. Because to your earlier point, the impact is typically a lifelong impact for those families and for generations. It just, goes on. So that's what I would recommend is they reach out. Every trauma center has to have an outreach program. If you're designated by the state or verified by the American College of Surgeons, you are required to have an outreach prevention program. And so when they come through every 3 years to redesignate or revalidate, you have to demonstrate and show what you've done over those 3 years, what communities, what people you impacted, how many, the dates, the courses, all of that. So it's happening. It's just probably not widely publicized, so we probably need to do a better job at that. But for Memorial Hermann, I recommend Sarah Beth Abbott.
Thank you. I work with Sarah with the Injury Free Coalition, so I can attest to how great she is.
Okay, great. She's phenomenal at what she does. She does such great work. It's unbelievable. We're very fortunate to have her.
And I'll just jump in here really quickly for the person who asked the question. Sarah Beth Abbott did post in the chat her email address where she can be reached. I'm not sure if you have access to the chat, but you can reach out to us and we can be sure to connect you with her contact information. Any other questions?
That's why I don't really get invited to parties, because I can really be the dampening of the spirit. So it's not surprising you're not having questions.
Thank you, Tom, so much for joining us. This was really, really informative, and we so appreciate you joining us and hope that we can continue to work with you on this effort. And if there are no other questions, okay, great. Thank you. We already worked together. There's a comment in there that you already worked together at the Injury Free Coalition for Kids. Okay, awesome.
Well, again, thank you for having us, and we'll continue to work with you and continue to work with Sarah Beth Abbott to connect us. But we're certainly here to help, and that's really been our mission, is to decrease these crashes. The gold standard would be to get to zero. I'm optimistic, but definitely can have an impact to decrease. And if we just save one person from something like this, or one family, we've made a difference. But imagine what we could do if we could save a whole lot more. So again, we appreciate you taking the time and inviting us, and we look forward to continuing to work with you all on your vision.
Thank you so much, Tom. We really appreciate it. We'll definitely look forward to working with you.
Okay. Well, thank you, and have a good evening, and be safe.
Yeah, you too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.